My husband told me he would file for divorce if I didn't let his mother, his brother, his brother's wife, and their 3 kids move into the house that I bought. I told him to start packing, but before he could even respond, his mother was already on the phone making calls to people I'd never met, telling them I was destroying her family. What she didn't know was that I'd already spoken to a lawyer, and what Keith didn't know was that the house, every square foot of it, was legally, financially, and completely mine. I need to go back a few years for this to make sense. I bought my house when I was 27, not with help from my parents, not with an inheritance, not with a partner splitting costs. I did it alone. I saved for 6 years working double shifts as a radiology tech at St. Francis Memorial 4 days a week and picking up weekend shifts at an urgent care clinic across town. For 6 years, I didn't take a single vacation. I didn't update my wardrobe. I drove the same 2011 Honda Civic with the cracked dashboard and the AC that only worked on the driver's side. I packed my lunch every single day. Turkey sandwich, apple, water bottle, same thing. Because eating out even once added up. My coworkers would order DoorDash and joke about my sad little lunch bag, and I'd smile and think about the number in my savings account getting a little bigger every 2 weeks. When I finally had enough for a 20% down payment, I bought a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street about 15 minutes from the hospital. 1,400 square feet, small backyard, a garage I converted into a home office. The day I signed the papers, I sat on the floor of the empty living room and cried. Not because I was sad, because I was 27 years old and I owned something. I had a place in the world that nobody could take from me. I paid the mortgage on my own every single month. Never missed, never late, not once. I met my husband Keith when I was 29 at a friend's barbecue. He was charming, warm, the kind of person who made everyone feel like the most important one in the room. He told me he admired how independent I was. He said most women he dated expected him to bankroll everything and that he respected that I had my own life. We dated for a year. No red flags. No drama. We got married at the courthouse with my sister Bridget and his friend Marco as witnesses. Small and simple. That was fine by me. Keith moved into my house after the wedding. We had a clear agreement before the marriage. I paid the mortgage because it was my house. My name on the deed. My name on the loan. He covered utilities and groceries. That was the deal. He never pushed back on it. He said he understood completely. His name was not on the deed. His name was not on the mortgage. This was not a secret. This was not a gray area. This was a conversation we had multiple times. Sober, with full clarity, and he agreed every time. For the first year, things were good. Keith worked as a delivery dispatcher for a logistics company. Decent hours, steady pay. He kept up his end of the arrangement. We split cooking. We watched movies on weekends. He laughed at my terrible jokes. I thought I'd found someone who actually saw me as a person and not just a provider. But there were small things that I filed away and didn't examine closely enough, like the time I mentioned refinancing to get a better rate. And Keith said, "Shouldn't we discuss that together since it affects both of us?" I reminded him his name wasn't on the mortgage. He said, "Right, but I live here too." Or the time a pipe burst in the bathroom and I called a plumber and paid the $800 bill myself. Keith said I should have told him first because he had a buddy who could have done it cheaper. I said it was my house and my decision. He got quiet for the rest of the night. These moments were small enough to dismiss individually. Together they formed a pattern I should have recognized much earlier. Keith's family lives about 2 hours north in a rental house. His mother Francine, his younger brother Dale, Dale's wife Tammy, and their 3 kids, ages 4, 7, and 9. I met them a handful of times. Thanksgiving twice, one birthday party for the 7-year-old, and a cookout at Francine's place where she ran out of food before I even got a plate. They were polite enough on the surface, but Francine always had this way of walking through my house like she was appraising it. She'd run her fingers along the countertops and peek into the bedrooms and say things like, "This is a lot of space for just 2 people, isn't it?" And, back at our place, we're practically climbing over each other. Must be nice to have all this room. She said it with a smile, but there was something underneath, something that felt like she was keeping a tally. Dale never said much. He'd sit on my couch, eat my food, and nod along to whatever Francine was saying. Tammy was friendly, but overwhelmed. 3 kids under 10 inches, a cramped rental will do that. The kids were loud, but I didn't hold that against them. They were kids. What I noticed was that nobody ever said thank you. Not for the meals I cooked. Not for the gas money Keith would slip Dale every visit. Not for the air mattress I bought specifically so Francine wouldn't have to sleep on the couch. It was expected. I was the one with the house. I was the one with the steady income. In their minds, that made it my job to accommodate. About a year into the marriage, small things started shifting. Keith began making comments about our house. Not my house. Our house. He'd say things like, "We should repaint the kitchen," or "We need a bigger TV for our living room." I corrected him once gently. I said, "It's my house, Keith. I'm happy you're here, but the deed is in my name." He got quiet for a full day. After that, I stopped correcting him because I didn't think it mattered. It was just language. I was wrong about that. Then Francine started calling more often, not to chat with me. She'd call Keith and I'd overhear pieces. She'd talk about how tight things were up north, how the landlord was raising their rent again, how Dale couldn't find better work, how the kids needed things she couldn't afford. Every call ended the same way, with Keith looking at me like I was supposed to volunteer something. I pretended not to notice. About 6 months ago, Francine called on a Sunday morning while Keith was in the shower. I answered because it was his phone and I thought it might be important. She didn't realize it was me at first. She was mid-sentence when I picked up. She said, "Has she said anything about the extra room? You said you'd bring it up." I said, "Francine, it's me." Long pause. Then she laughed and said, "Oh honey, I was just asking Keith about storage. You know how it is." I said sure and handed the phone to Keith when he came out. He didn't mention the call. I didn't bring it up, but I remembered it. 3 weeks ago, Keith sat me down after dinner with this serious expression that I'd never seen before. He told me his family was losing their rental. The landlord was selling the property and they had 60 days to find somewhere else. He said they couldn't afford anything in their area. Everything was too expensive or too far from Dale's job. He said they were running out of options and that his mother had been crying every night. I said that was terrible and I meant it. I asked how we could help. I was thinking financially. First and last month's rent somewhere more affordable. Help with a secure. I said no. I didn't pause. I didn't ask for time to think. I didn't soften it. I just said no. He asked me why. Like the answer wasn't obvious. I told him there wasn't enough room. 3 bedrooms. We use 1. Francine would need 1. That leaves a single bedroom for Dale, Tammy, and 3 kids. He said the kids could share the living room. I said I was not converting my living room into a sleeping area for 3 children. He said we could rotate. I asked him what that even meant. He said the kids could sleep in shifts. I said that was insane. He said I was being selfish. I said I was being realistic. He said I didn't care about his family. I said I cared about them enough to offer financial help. But moving 5 people into a house that was already full was not help. It was chaos. That conversation ended with him sleeping on the couch and me lying in bed staring at the ceiling. The next morning, Francine called me directly. She didn't go through Keith. She called my phone. She said she heard I had concerns about the living situation and she wanted to reassure me. She said they were quiet and clean. She said the kids were well behaved. She said they'd keep to themselves and I'd barely notice they were there. 5 additional people in 1,400 square feet and I'd barely notice. Then she said the line that I will never forget. She said we wouldn't ask if we had any other choice. You're the only one in this family with a house. The only one in this family with a house. Like my house was a family resource. Like because I worked 6 years of double shifts and gave up my 20s to buy a home, I now owed it to 5 people I'd met 4 times. I told her I was sorry, but it wasn't possible. She got quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I see," and hung up without saying goodbye. That night, Keith came home and told me Francine was devastated. He said I had humiliated his mother. I asked him how saying no politely was humiliation. He said I didn't understand what family meant. I told him I understood exactly what it meant and that his family's housing crisis was not my burden to solve. He said, "So you're just going to let them end up on the street?" I said, "I offered to help them find a place and put money toward it. You're the one who rejected that." He walked out of the room. He didn't speak to me for 2 days. Not a word, not a glance. He moved through the house like I was furniture. On the second day, I noticed he'd been on the phone with Francine for over an hour in the garage. When he came inside, his jaw was set and his eyes were different, harder. On the 3rd morning, he came into the kitchen while I was making coffee and said, "If you won't do this for my family, then I don't think this marriage is going to work." I put the coffee pot down and looked at him. He wasn't angry. He was calm, rehearsed. He said, "I'm serious. If you can't open your home to the people I love, then maybe we shouldn't be together." I asked him to repeat it. He did, word for word, same flat delivery, like he'd practiced in the mirror. I asked him if he was threatening to divorce me because I wouldn't let 5 people move into my house. He said he wasn't threatening. He said he was being honest about what he needed from a partner. Something clicked in that moment. Not rage, not sadness, clarity. I looked at this man standing in the kitchen of the house I'd bought, wearing slippers he kept in the closet of the bedroom I furnished, drinking orange juice from the refrigerator I paid for, and telling me that I was the problem. I told him I needed a minute. I went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and called my older sister Bridget. She's a paralegal at a family law firm and the sharpest person I know. I told her everything. The request, the pressure from Francine, the ultimatum. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me one question. Whose name is on the deed? I said mine. Whose name is on the mortgage? Mine. Did he sign a prenup? No, but we have nothing joint. No shared accounts, no shared debts, no shared property. She said, then you already know what to do. And if he thinks divorce is a threat, let him find out what it actually looks like when you own everything and he owns nothing. I sat there for another minute letting that settle. Then I went back to the kitchen. Keith was sitting at the table scrolling his phone. I told him I'd thought about it. He looked up and I could see it in his face. He thought I'd caved. He thought 2 days of silence and 1 ultimatum had broken me. I said, if this marriage can't work because I won't let 5 people move into the house I bought and paid for entirely by myself, then you're right. It's not going to work. His face dropped. He put his phone on the table. He said, what are you saying? I said, I'm saying if your condition for staying married is that I give up my home to your family, then you should start packing because this is my house. Your name is not on it. It has never been on it. And if you want a divorce over this, I will not fight you on it, but you will be the one leaving. He stared at me like I'd spoken a different language. Then he laughed. Not a real laugh, a nervous, disbelieving sound. He said, you're bluffing. I said I wasn't. He said, you wouldn't throw away our marriage over a house. I said, you just did. You gave me an ultimatum. I'm giving you an answer. He left the room. I heard him in the garage on the phone again. 20 minutes later, my phone started ringing. Francine. I didn't answer. Then Dale called. Then Tammy. Then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Francine's sister, a woman I'd never met in my life, calling to tell me I was heartless and that God was watching. I let them all go to voicemail. In the span of 1 hour, I had 11 missed calls and a string of texts from numbers I didn't have saved. One of them said, Keith told us you're kicking him out for asking for help. You should be ashamed of yourself. Another said, family means sacrifice. You obviously don't understand that. A third one, from someone named Donna, who I'd never heard of, said, my church group is praying for Keith. He deserves better. The last one, from Francine directly, said, I always knew you weren't right for him. A real wife puts family first. I sat on the couch and scrolled through every single message. I read each one carefully. I screenshotted all of them and emailed them to myself and to Bridget. Not out of hurt, out of documentation. Because the one thing I'd learned from watching Bridget work was that when people show you, you're actually doing this. I said, "You told me to." He said, "I didn't mean it like that. I was frustrated. I was trying to make you understand how important this is." I said, "And I was trying to make you understand that no means no. You chose to escalate. You chose to make it an ultimatum. I'm just honoring the terms you set." He sat down across from me and put his head in his hands. He asked if we could talk about this. I said we'd been talking about it for 3 weeks, and every conversation ended with him calling me selfish or threatening to leave. The next day, I retained an attorney. Bridget helped me find one who specialized in property disputes within divorce proceedings. The attorney confirmed what Bridget had already told me. The house was mine, purchased before the marriage, mortgage in my name, deed in my name. Keith had no financial claim to it. In our state, property acquired before the marriage and maintained solely by one spouse is not subject to equitable distribution. Keith could file for divorce if he wanted, but he'd be walking away with his clothes and his car. That was it. Keith tried a different approach after that. He got soft. He brought me flowers. He cooked dinner. He stopped mentioning his family entirely for 4 days. Then on the 5th day, he sat me down again and said, "What if it was just my mom? Just Francine. No Dale. No Tammy. No kids. Just one person. One bedroom. Temporarily." I asked him to define temporarily. He said a few months. I said, "Your mother told me I was wrong for you less than a week ago. She called people I've never met to tell them I was heartless. She walked through my house for 2 years making comments about how much space I had, and now you want her living here?" He didn't answer. 3 days later, Francine showed up at the house unannounced. I came home from a 1-2-hour shift, still in my scrubs, and she was sitting on my porch with a suitcase and a paper bag from a fast food restaurant. Keith was standing in the driveway with his arms crossed, looking like he wanted to melt into the concrete. She smiled at me and said, "I thought if I just came down, we could work this out in person. Sometimes things get lost over the phone." I looked at Keith. I said, "Did you know about this?" He said she told him she was coming, but he didn't think she'd actually do it. I said, "So you didn't warn me?" He said nothing. Francine stood up, smoothing her jacket and said, "Honey, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I'm here now and I just want to talk. Woman to woman. Can I at least come inside?" I said, "No, Francine. There's nothing to talk about. The answer is no. It was no 3 weeks ago. It's no today. It will be no tomorrow." She looked at Keith like she expected him to intervene. He looked at the ground. Her expression shifted from warm to cold in about 2 seconds. She picked up her suitcase and called Dale to come get her. While she waited, she sat on the porch steps with her back to me and didn't say another word. She sat there for 45 minutes until Dale pulled up. He didn't get out of the car. He didn't acknowledge me. Francine loaded her own suitcase and left without looking back. That night, Keith and I sat in the living room in total silence for over an hour. Finally, he said, "She sat on that porch for 45 minutes waiting for a ride and you didn't even offer her a glass of water." I said, "She showed up at my home uninvited with a suitcase, Keith. She wasn't visiting. She was moving in, and you let it happen." He didn't have a response to that. Keith moved out the following Saturday. Not because I kicked him out, but because the silence between us had become a wall that neither of us could climb over. He packed his things into his car and a small U-Haul that Dale drove down for him. Francine sat in the passenger seat of Dale's truck the entire time, watching through the window. She never came inside. She never spoke to me, but she watched every box come out of that house like she was keeping inventory. When Keith carried out the last bag, Francine rolled down the window and said loud enough for me to hear, "Don't worry, baby. She'll regret this." Keith didn't respond. He just climbed into his car. Before he left, he stood in the doorway and said, "You chose a house over me." I said, "You chose your mother's comfort over our marriage. The only difference is I'm the one being honest about it." The divorce was finalized 2 months later, uncontested because there was nothing to contest. No shared property, no kids, no complicated finances. My attorney said it was one of the cleanest divorces she'd ever handled. Keith got nothing from the house because he was owed nothing from the house. His attorney tried to argue that his utility payments constituted a financial interest in the property. My attorney presented 3 years of mortgage statements, all in my name, all paid from my account, and the argument was dismissed in about 15 minutes. I heard through mutual friends that Keith moved in with Francine and Dale, all of them in that same cramped rental they hadn't lost after all. Turns out the landlord accepted their counteroffer at a lower price and they stayed. The housing emergency that was supposed to upend my life resolved itself the moment I was no longer an option. I don't know if Keith planned it that way or if Francine orchestrated the whole thing, but the timing was interesting. Francine sent me one last message the week the papers were signed. It said, "I hope you're happy alone in that big house. God sees everything." I read it once and deleted it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say to someone who saw my home as something I owed the world. Here's the thing Francine never understood. I'm not alone. I have Bridget. I have friends who showed up with wine and pizza the night Keith left. I have a career I built from nothing. I have a home that I earned with 6 years of sacrifice and discipline and cold turkey sandwiches. I'm not alone. I'm just not surrounded by people who see me as a resource. It's been 4 months since the divorce. I repainted the bedroom. I got a dog, a rescue named Penny, who sleeps at the foot of the bed and growls at the mailman. I started a container garden in the backyard. The house is quiet and clean and exactly the way I want it. Last week, Bridget came over for dinner and asked if I had any regrets. I thought about it for a moment. I said the only thing I regretted was not seeing it sooner. The comments about space, the phone calls about money, the slow creep of my house becoming our house. It was never about the marriage. It was about the house. It was always about the house, and it's still mine.